There is a specific kind of pain that comes from being the smartest person in the room like Da Vinci here, but having no way to prove it. Imagine being Leonardo da Vinci and feeling inadequate every day of your life for decades. At least feeling inadequate before you use the self-education technique I'm going to teach you today, something I found in Da Vinci. It's something so engaging, so effective that you're going to love how much it makes you learn, even though there's a little bit of a stretch because it involves mirror writing with a few twists that I'm adding of my own or twists that I found from the ancient memory tradition, books that I believe Da Vinci probably read. And they're very, very essential to me as I enter law school as a mature student, because I need to have the best possible learning techniques, and Da Vinci's are golden. And keep in mind as we get into this that the techniques work just as well for complex formulas, medical terminology, for the law, and what Da Vinci was studying, something he was desperate to master in his lifetime to overcome that feeling he had of being inadequate. Not having imposter syndrome, but literally not belonging in the room and incapable of having the conversations he wanted to have, even if he was in the rooms he wanted to be in. Now you might be thinking, hang on, Leonardo da Vinci was no slouch. How could he have had such a poor self-image? Hard to believe, but he did. Even as Da Vinci was painting masterpieces, he called himself an illiterate man. And he was drawing little scowling faces in his Latin notebook where he was keeping word lists. I don't know exactly what that Scowling man was about, but part of it seems to be scowling because he had been kept out of the serious conversations during his time because he didn't know Latin. So the question is, were these doodles really about the angry face that he had because Latin was so difficult for him to study? Or was it that Da Vinci was actually using part of the learning techniques we're going to talk about today? Stick around and find out, because to learn Latin, the one thing Da Vinci wanted so badly so he could have conversations in those rooms, what he did was to copy out Latin vocabulary by hand in his Codex Trivoltianus. And it had 51 pages in this codex, culled from a variety of sources. And what's fascinating is that scholars have argued for decades about why Da Vinci was doing this, because he almost certainly wasn't just copying out words to help him remember their sounds and definitions. He was actually manipulating these words in some very interesting ways that help go beyond just rote repetition. And there are clues in what I think Da Vinci might have been up to that link to other books from the memory tradition that I think Da Vinci probably read. And so we're going to patch in all of these additional tools, whether he read them or not. But first, let's look a little bit more at the pain driving Da Vinci in the first place. Because he was born illegitimate, or they called him illegitimate in his time, and that meant that he was locked out of the university system entirely. No Latin grammar school, no formal classical education, and in Renaissance Italy, that meant that you were functionally excluded from most, if not all, serious intellectual debates, conversations, social meetings. You couldn't talk about law, medicine, philosophy, theology. All of this would be beyond your reach because it was all conducted and published in Latin. Now, many people in that position just accepted it, not Da Vinci. In his late 30s, I think around 1490, he sat down and began teaching himself Latin from scratch. And Walter Isaacson describes this page that we've already looked at, where Da Vinci copied over 130 Latin words on a single sheet, and in the midst of that, he drew this scowling man grimacing. Now, in reproducing some of Da Vinci's method of copying out these Latin words and then twisting them around in some interesting ways you'll learn in a minute, I got out my old Jones and Sidwell Latin textbooks that I had used in university, and I was starting to write out these words again and thinking about drawing my own little scowling man, because part of the way to help yourself remember things is to use multiple emotions and have your mind engage on multiple levels simultaneously. And that's the key that separates real learning from just decorative studying, rote learning, where, you just go through the motions. And this is where interesting arguments amongst Da Vinci scholars come in, where we'll unpack some of the clues about how Da Vinci was maybe going beyond what it seems by just copying out these words to establish memory. So there's an author named Raymond Stites, and he analyzed these pages and concluded that when Da Vinci filled a page with word list, he was following a process that essentially, anybody could reproduce and try, which is a kind of rote learning. He's writing it down as quickly as he can, and then in his mind, he's associating words as rapidly as he can write with other words and making this haphazard list. So it's kind of rote learning with some mnemonic chains of free association. But we can do more than association. And if you don't know what association is, it's basically taking a word and then trying to find something else associated with that word, either with its sound or meaning or both, that helps you remember it. So if it's, amo, like amo, amas, amat, for love in Latin, you would have like ammunition, ammo, to help you remember, and then have a Cupid shooting, a lot of ammunition. So that's a basic association. But is that really the only thing that Da Vinci is doing? Well, no. Augusto Marignoni, he wrote one of the most important critiques of Stites, and he argued that Da Vinci had a number of aims for these lists that made them very multisensory and multi-purpose. And that's a critical insight for anyone watching who wants to learn more, learn faster, and hold it for longer in your memory. Da Vinci's word lists essentially had at least 4 purposes. And one of them was that he probably just liked the sound of the words. And if this is true, he's, yes, using a certain level of repetition, but also there's a sense that he's reorganizing the sounds to stimulate his own memory. He's playing with the language the way a musician plays with scales. And he was also filling in the gaps in his understanding of classical and humanistic culture. So there's the joy of playing around with words, but then also understanding that the words are they're not just vocabulary, they're windows onto bodies of knowledge that he'd been excluded from. Then there's the social currency that he had in mind. He wanted to serve better as a man of letters in conversation with his contemporaries. He talked about this, and so these were tools of anticipation. And, thinking about how one day you're going to be able to sit in rooms filled with university-educated people, that is anticipatory thinking. And you can literally craft your future that way if you focus on the image, but then continue to take steps towards achieving that image. So that's part of what he was doing as well. And then he's doing free association and creativity, which is this chain association method. This is exercising your capacity to make unexpected connections, which, if you know about Da Vinci, connections was the engine behind many, many of the things that he created. So in other words, Da Vinci's not just memorizing, he's building a neural map in his head. And, if you're thinking about how you're going to handle multiple choice exams or work in high-speed environments where you don't have all the time to learn, well, these kinds of engines that you can build of association, they're going to help you, and they're what allowed Da Vinci to be the sharpest mind in any room. So it's not just about knowing these words, it's about having purposes for them, it's about anticipating what they're going to do for you, and it's about playing with them. And if you want to become the kind of person who can teach yourself anything with these multiple engines of learning and memory that we've just talked about, supporting you at deeper and deeper levels, whether you're learning Latin or medicine or computer coding or prepping for an entirely new career, and you want the actual methods that have been working for centuries, not just motivational fluff, hit subscribe if you're new here and smash the like button right now so loud that Da Vinci can hear it as he's rolling in his grave. This is mission critical because the more people who learn how to learn, the better everything gets for everyone. So join this mission to raise all ships for everybody now and in the future. Now, let's assume that Marignoni is right about all of these different levels that Da Vinci is bringing to his Codex Travatianus. He's using, Da Vinci, multiple encoding channels to learn, playing with sounds, free association, emotional engagement, anticipatory thinking. And we have all the evidence that he was also using active learning. That scrawl, the sketch of the Scowling Man, he was not passively engaged here. So let's see what happens when I try Da Vinci's multi-layered approach. I'm going to take a few Latin terms I actually need for law school that I found during my initial reading and walk you through the complete process. So step one is that I write the Latin phrase backward in my non-dominant hand. Even if it sounds too simple or weird to work, this actually belongs to a realm of science called Neurobics, and it can start changing your neural chemistry instantly in some very positive ways. So if you've ever struggled to focus, well, try writing backwards, and try writing backwards in your non-dominant hand. They're not necessarily the same thing, but you can do the two things at the same time, which is what I prefer to do. And it is so engaging, and I wind up paying much more attention to what I'm learning, and then I remember it better as a result. So that's step one. The second step is to say the word out loud. Listen deeply to the sound. Go deep into each syllable, and try to then think, what else does this remind me of? So one of the Latin phrases I learned recently is res ipsa loquitur. And this basically means the thing speaks for itself. Now, keep in mind that I'm doing Latin, but if you're in medical school and you got to learn sartorius, the longest muscle in the body, you'd also just write it backwards, like suriatras or suriotras, and you'd say it aloud like that. And listen to how this works. If you say it backwards, it sounds a little bit like sewer trash. And so maybe you imagine now a location in a sewer, and you have Splinter from the Ninja Turtles because he lives in a sewer, and Splinter and Sartorius both start with S, but backwards it sounds a bit like sewer trash. Now, you might be thinking, I don't know the Ninja Turtles, I don't know Splinter. Well, push a little. Find another S figure. I would probably use the philosopher Sartre and imagine him in a sewer. Or I could stick with pop culture and use Superman and have him in a sewer. Or I would use a Splinter because I often use Splinter. But when push comes to shove, you can use anything that you want, but just get started. Or use a memory wheel based on what I taught you in my previous video about Giordano Bruno and the memory wheel for language learning. But that's the core, playing around with language and writing backwards and then sounding it out and then pushing for associations based on forward and backward sounds. This gives you a lot of vivid associations that help the information stick. So it doesn't matter if it's a Latin maxim or a skeletal muscle or whatever it is you have to learn. Taking on this awkwardness is going to help you develop more memory. And the more physical and mental you make your practice at the same time, by writing these words out in different directions and then sounding them out so your physical mouth gets involved and your physical ears hear your own sounds, the more you're promoting depth of memorization. Now, the third step gets even more challenging, but that's what makes it rewarding. You change the vowels and the consonant structure. And this gets very interesting to me because scholars believe that Da Vinci did this. He moved around vowels and consonants. And this makes me think that he may have known about a book called The Phoenix by Peter of Ravenna and another mnemonist called Jacobus Publicius. So Ravenna and Publicius, they both talked about rotating vowels and consonants around. And Publicius also built a kind of very strange and wonderful memory wheel that almost looks like it has a sartorius muscle built into it, but it's actually a snake. And if you're interested, I've created editions of the memory training books packed with exercises that I think Da Vinci might have known about. These are called Phoenix Reborn and Rules Reborn. And soon I'll be doing another live boot camp based around Phoenix Reborn. So the description is your friend if you want to make sure you don't miss the notification when registration goes live. So let's look at rearranging res ipsa loquitur for the thing that speaks for itself. Rearranged, the word now looks like rip seal ruocluit. And written backwards, it's like rit ucul aspicer. And I suggest that you do both, combinations and backwards writing, and sound it out, and it's going to help your memory. Now, note that I'm not just writing in different directions. I'm focusing my brain by also writing with my non-dominant hand and sounding this out to make it as physical as possible. Having it through the hands, through the mouth, in my own ears, not only creates magnetic focus, but it also repels distractions because I have to concentrate more in order to do it. So give this tactic a try. I think you'll feel the benefits very, very soon. I've been doing some of these things for a long time, and I wish that I'd been doing them even longer because they're so powerful. But let's address a potential problem, a big, nasty issue that's going to stop some people in their tracks. My years of experience teaching these techniques suggests that there are people already worried that they're going to use these techniques and wind up learning things incorrectly. So let's make no bones about it. That is a real risk. It's legit. And sometimes it happens to me during the learning process. But you know what? Even English, which I've known since I was a wee little whippersnapper, I still get backwards and get wrong. And sometimes I watch my videos and I've said things in mispronounced English and got words backwards and switched one thing in for another. So the idea that using these memory techniques would lead to errors is a little bit of a non-problem because we're going to make errors anyway. We're not ChatGPT. We're humans. And remember, you have the written record. So since mistakes are never going away, and in 99.9% of the cases out there, we're going to have a benefit from playing around with these words. They're going to help us remember things better because we're increasing our auditory dexterity and we're using so many levels of sensation. I mean, no one worries that completing word search puzzles where some of the words have to be completed backwards is going to ruin their abilities in their mother tongue, right? And so the real point is this. When writing backwards and playing around with vowel and consonant orders, your brain can't coast. It has to pay attention to every single part of the target word. It's uncomfortable, and that discomfort gets your brain encoding the target information into long-term memory much faster. And you know, there's a deeper principle, and it has to do with one of the most underappreciated ideas in all of self-education. And it comes from a very smart thinker and writer you need to know about. But first, since I'm entering one of the most demanding bodies of knowledge and I'm using the magnetic memory method in real time along with Da Vinci's method and the variations that I'm sharing with you today, and I'm possibly also going to include mind maps and many more techniques that are actually quite difficult, if not impossible, to teach via video. If you're also taking on massive learning challenges like law, medicine, theology, you're trying to complete the process of learning a language, or you're taking on learning tasks to build your career, and you would like more access to more accelerated learning techniques like this, you're invited to see more of what I'm doing and have access to tips and inspiration much more frequently than I can make videos as I journal what I'm doing to learn real material with real stakes, especially during law school. So you can join my new newsletter called Tips from the Trenches, and you'll receive exclusive and regular dispatches from my learning practice. What's working, what's failing, specific techniques for memorizing large bodies of professional and academic material, and a direct line to the community of people who follow this, who are serious about memory, polymathy, and self-directed education. So that's at magneticmemorymethod.com/TT for Tips from the Trenches. Now, who is this scholar I just mentioned? His name was Erasmus, and Erasmus had a name for the journals where writers collected their word lists. He called them lexicoi elencoi. And these weren't just study aids. They were thinking tools. The act of collecting, organizing, and playing with words was itself a form of intellectual development, but keeping a journal, well, I don't know if Erasmus had this in mind or Da Vinci had this in mind, but it's also a kind of memory palace. You know where in the pages you've kept various lists or little doodles that you made. And Da Vinci understood this principle deeply. Every word he wrote in the Codex Trivoltianus served his memory, his social standing, his creative practice, and his cultural education simultaneously. He wasn't just studying Latin, he was becoming a different kind of thinker. And even if he didn't recall everything perfectly, we know he didn't master Latin to the highest possible level. But putting in the effort still made all the difference in the world, epically so. So when you sit down to learn anything for any purpose, no matter what it is, please make sure that you don't learn it for just one reason. Try and learn it for at least 3 to 5 reasons, and push even further if you can. But 5 is a real nice number, as I discussed in my book, The Victorious Mind, and that has been important to my own success, to try to always find enough reasons so that I'm able to stir the mental pot a little and see what's rolling around in there before I decide to do something. Now, this is not a deviation or a rabbit hole or a side topic. Asking questions about why he was doing certain things is something Da Vinci did, and you can learn more about it by reading his biography. Ask questions like, why do I need to learn this or that topic? Is it for professional reasons? Is it for personal satisfaction? Can I find ways to, do both? How does every word or term that I'm memorizing connect to my existing knowledge? Constantly asking this sort of question. Who do I know that also knows something about this? That's something Da Vinci did. And then he would go and talk to them. And then that would make deeper memory connections in learning. And you can journal about this in your journal. And you can make little drawings that help you remember more of what you answer to these questions. And I don't know if Da Vinci used memory palaces or not, but these journals are kind of like memory palaces because they help us locate information. So every piece of information that you can locate and then elaborate with all your reasons why and little doodles and drawings and flipping around the consonants and the vowels, well, it's worth an experiment, right? And when you think about Da Vinci and how hard he worked to memorize Latin, I mean, it's just amazing that he took the time to do that when he was so talented in another area, which is painting, art, right? Isn't that so interesting that he still felt inadequate despite being the best at what he was doing? Well, this is a huge inspiration to me because, I'm starting law at an older age. He started Latin at an older age. And although I have a PhD already, I just still have to deal with my mind the way that it is and recognize I'm not always the sharpest person because of the age that I'm at. Now, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I like to dream big, but realistically. But Da Vinci, King Francis I of France, invited Leonardo da Vinci to be his guest and premier painter, his engineer, his architect, and that was how Da Vinci spent the final years of his life. The king even gave Da Vinci an entire house to work in, and he was treated by the king with immense respect, often engaging in deep intellectual conversations for hours. Now, if that isn't outlearning every other self-taught scholar in Europe, I don't know what is. Now, although we're not all going to get invited by kings to have a house of our own to do our own thing, we do all have the chance to use the best ancient learning tools with the newly emerging technologies. And that's another reason I'm so interested in applying what I've learned from Da Vinci and other people of his time to the law. The law is about history. It's about logic. And there's no way that the law is going to be free from the influence of AI. So bringing together memory techniques and technology while more and more things to learn and to memorize keep emerging is such a wild adventure. It's amazing. And so you and I have everything Da Vinci had, plus many, many learning tools and opportunities he was missing. But as powerful as Da Vinci's strategies and notebooks were, he was missing one tool that a very interesting polymath and the third president of the United States used to practically automate his memory. Thomas Jefferson carried a very specific and strange device that allowed him to capture and retain data with, well, not zero friction, but the best kind of friction needed to enhance both memory and understanding. So if you think Da Vinci's learning techniques hold as much promise for revving your mental engines as I do, you need to see how Thomas Jefferson turned his entire life into a living database. I've broken down exactly what his secret weapon was and how you can use it in my video on Thomas Jefferson. So take my deep dive into Thomas Jefferson's strategy for massive amounts of data and how he managed it, and get my tips from the trenches. Write backwards, switch those vowels around, speak them out loud, make it as physical as you possibly can. And until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.